Apache women arrived on Christmas Eve. "I need a shelter," she said to the widowed rancher. People living there were used to dry wind, dust, and wide, empty skies, not cold mornings where frost clung to fence posts and the ground felt hard under boots. Yet that December, the air stayed sharp day after day, and even the cattle moved slower, their breath rising in pale clouds. Daniel Mercer noticed every change, but he never spoke about it. He rarely spoke at all anymore. His ranch stood nearly 5 miles from town, surrounded by flat land broken only by low hills and scattered mesquite trees. The house was simple, 2 rooms, a narrow kitchen, and a wooden porch facing west where sunsets painted the horizon red each evening. It had once been a warm place filled with voices, cooking smells, and soft laughter. Now it was clean, quiet, and almost untouched. Daniel kept it that way. Each morning he woke before the sun, dressed in silence, and stepped outside with the same steady movements. He checked the well, fed the horses, then walked the fence line no matter how cold it was. Work gave him direction. Work kept his thoughts from wandering to places he tried not to visit. 2 winters earlier, sickness had come suddenly. A fever had spread through the settlement. Within 1 week, his wife Eliza and their newborn son were gone. There had been no warning and no time to understand why. One day the house had life, the next day it held only stillness. After the burial, neighbors tried to help. Some brought food, others tried conversation. Daniel thanked them politely but stopped visiting town except when supplies were necessary. Gradually, people stopped expecting him at gatherings. They stopped inviting him to celebrations. It was easier that way for everyone. The second bedroom remained closed. He had shut the door the day after the funeral and never opened it again. December meant little to him now. He knew Christmas was coming because the general store carried extra flour and sugar, and children in town talked louder than usual. But on the ranch, the day would be no different than any other: animals to feed, tools to repair, firewood to split. On the morning of Christmas Eve, the sky stayed pale gray from sunrise onward. Cold wind moved across the land in long, steady breaths. Daniel spent hours mending a broken gate while his old horse, Ranger, stood tied nearby. The animal was aging but loyal, rarely reacting to anything. By late afternoon, Daniel finished his chores and carried wood into the house. He lit the stove and set a kettle on top. The familiar routine filled the quiet rooms: the crackle of fire, the soft whistle of heating metal, the ticking sound of cooling boards in the walls. He sat at the table and ate a simple meal of beans and bread. He ate slowly, more out of habit than hunger. Across from him stood the empty chair he had never moved. Sometimes his eyes rested there without him realizing. Outside, the light faded early. Winter nights came fast in open country. The horizon darkened and the temperature dropped sharply. Daniel poured himself coffee and stared through the small window above the sink. Snow was beginning, light flakes drifting unevenly, rare for that land but not impossible. Ranger suddenly made a sound from the corral. It was not loud, just a short, restless snort. Daniel noticed because the horse almost never complained. He set the cup down and listened. For a moment, everything was quiet again, the wind moving along the walls. Then Ranger stamped the ground and pulled lightly against the rope. Daniel reached for his coat and stepped outside. The cold hit immediately, sharper than before. Snow touched his hat brim and melted. The sky was nearly dark now, only a thin line of fading orange remaining. He walked toward the corral, boots pressing into frozen dirt. Ranger turned his head toward the distant fence line instead of toward Daniel. The animal's ears stayed forward, alert. Daniel followed the direction of the horse's gaze. At first he saw nothing but shadows and the pale movement of snow. Then he noticed a shape near the outer gate, still, almost blending with the dusk. Someone was standing there. He stopped walking. Visitors rarely came to the ranch, and never after sunset. The settlement was too far for casual travel, especially in cold weather. His first thought was that someone from town needed help. His second thought was caution. The figure did not move closer. After a few seconds, Daniel continued forward slowly. The snow made faint sounds under his boots. As he approached, the shape became clearer, a person wrapped in worn clothing standing just beyond the fence. A woman. She looked exhausted, as though she had walked a very long distance. Her shoulders sagged slightly from the weight she carried. In her arms, she held a bundle wrapped tightly in cloth close against her chest. Daniel stopped a few steps away from the gate. The wind lifted strands of her dark hair across her face. She did not raise her hands, did not step back, and did not show any sign of threat. She simply waited. For a moment neither spoke. The only sound was the wind brushing across the dry grass and the quiet shifting of Ranger behind Daniel. Finally, he opened the gate but did not yet invite her in. He studied her expression, tired, wary, and determined all at once. Her eyes held the look of someone who had not slept properly in many nights. Her voice, when it came, was soft and strained from cold. "I need a shelter," she said. The words were simple, yet heavy with meaning. She did not ask for food or money, only shelter. Daniel noticed how tightly she held the bundle. The cloth moved slightly, enough to show something alive inside. A child. He felt an old memory stir, the faint echo of holding his own son, wrapped much the same way on a winter night that felt very far away now. The woman swayed a little as the wind pushed against her. She had clearly reached the end of her strength but still remained standing, waiting for his answer rather than stepping forward without permission. Snow gathered lightly on her shoulders. Daniel stood silent longer than he realized. His life had become carefully controlled. No surprises, no attachments, no chances for pain to return. Letting someone inside meant breaking that order. Yet leaving her outside in the cold would also be a choice he would carry afterward. The kettle inside the house began faintly whistling through the open doorway behind him, the warm air escaping into the night. The woman's grip on the bundle tightened protectively. Daniel finally stepped aside from the gate. "Come in," he said quietly. For the first time, relief crossed her face. She entered slowly, careful and cautious, as though uncertain the welcome would remain. Ranger relaxed immediately, lowering his head, the tension leaving him as if the decision itself settled the air. Together they walked toward the house, the widowed rancher and the stranger carrying a child, while snow continued to fall softly over the silent land on that cold Christmas Eve. The warmth of the house reached them before they stepped inside. The door had been left slightly open, and orange firelight spilled across the porch boards into the falling snow. The woman paused at the entrance as if unsure whether she truly belonged there. Daniel noticed she waited for him to move first. He pushed the door wider and stepped aside. She entered slowly, careful not to bring too much dirt onto the floor. Her boots were worn thin and damp from the cold ground. Snow melted instantly from her clothing as the heat touched her. For a moment she simply stood near the doorway, letting the warmth reach her hands. The bundle in her arms shifted again, and a faint sound came from inside, weak, restless. Daniel closed the door firmly against the wind and added another log to the stove. The fire brightened and filled the room with a steady glow. Shadows moved along the walls, making the small house feel less empty than it had in years. "You can sit," he said, motioning toward a chair near the fire. She hesitated, then lowered herself carefully onto it. Only then did Daniel notice how tired she truly was. Her shoulders dropped, and her eyes briefly closed as if her body almost forgot to remain awake. The child stirred again, a soft whimper escaping the cloth. Daniel fetched a cup and filled it with water from a tin pitcher. He offered it to her. She accepted with both hands, nodding once before drinking slowly. She did not rush, but each swallow seemed important. "My name is Daniel," he said after a quiet moment. She looked at him, studying his face as though measuring his intention. "A pony," she replied softly. The name sounded unfamiliar to him, yet gentle. He nodded once, unsure what else to say. Conversation did not come easily anymore. The small sound came again from the bundle, weaker than before. A pony carefully unwrapped part of the cloth. Inside lay a baby boy, his cheeks pale and his breathing uneven. His eyes remained closed and his tiny hands moved without strength. Daniel felt a tightening in his chest he had not allowed himself to feel for years. "He has fever," she said quietly. Daniel leaned closer but kept respectful distance. Heat radiated from the child's skin even from where he stood. The boy's breathing was shallow and quick, not steady like a sleeping infant should be. Without thinking much, Daniel moved toward the kitchen area and poured more water into a small pot. He set it over the stove to warm. Old habits returned, movements he had not practiced since the winter that took his own family. A pony watched him carefully, surprise visible in her tired eyes. He opened a cupboard and took a clean cloth from a shelf. After wetting it with warm water, he wrung it gently and handed it to her. She understood and pressed it lightly against the baby's forehead. Minutes passed in silence except for the crackling fire and soft wind tapping the walls. The child's breathing remained strained. Aponi adjusted the cloth again and again, never taking her eyes off the boy. "You traveled far?" Daniel asked at last. She nodded. "Many days." Her voice carried exhaustion more than fear. She did not explain further, and he did not press. Still, the meaning was clear. She had nowhere else to go. He placed another log into the fire. The flames rose brighter, warming the entire room. The kettle began to steam softly. Daniel poured a little warm water into another cup and placed it near her. "Drink," he said. This time she did not refuse. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the cup. When she finished, color returned faintly to her face. Night deepened outside. The wind grew stronger, pushing lightly against the door. The ranch sat alone under darkness, far from any other light. Inside, however, the air felt almost safe. Several times Aponi looked toward the door, as though thinking she should leave before causing trouble. Each time she remained seated, the baby's condition keeping her there. Daniel understood the hesitation. Strangers were rarely trusted easily in that land from either side, yet he noticed she stayed close to the chair edge, ready to stand quickly if asked. "You can stay tonight," he said quietly. "Storm coming." She looked at him again, longer this time, relief mixed with caution. She nodded once. Hours passed slowly. Daniel brewed weak tea using dried leaves he still kept stored. Aponi drank it carefully. The warmth steadied her breathing. The child continued to struggle, sometimes restless, sometimes frighteningly still. At one point she began whispering in her own language, soft and rhythmic. The sound filled the room gently. Daniel did not understand the words, but he understood the feeling, a mother's worry. The sound stirred memories he usually buried. Nights long ago when Eliza had done the same beside their son's cradle. The house had once known those sounds often. Daniel stood near the window, staring into darkness while the memories tried to return. He forced his attention back to the present, the fire, the storm, and the fragile life before him. Near midnight the baby coughed weakly. Aponi immediately leaned forward, holding him upright. Fear flashed across her face. Daniel moved closer, unsure what help he could give but unable to stand apart. "Will he live?" she asked, barely louder than a breath. Daniel paused. He had learned long ago that honesty mattered more than comfort. "I don't know," he answered quietly. She nodded, accepting the truth. The wind outside howled stronger now. Snow struck the walls and roof steadily. Travel in such weather would be impossible until morning. The ranch had become their shelter, whether either planned it or not. Daniel brought another blanket and draped it over her shoulders. This time she did not resist the help. Exhaustion finally showed openly as her eyes struggled to stay open. "You rest," he said. "I watch fire." For a moment she seemed unwilling to sleep, but her body betrayed her. Still holding the child, she leaned back in the chair, eyes closing slowly though her hands never loosened their hold. Daniel remained awake, seated near the stove. He added wood when needed and listened to the rhythm of the baby's breathing. Sometimes it steadied, sometimes it weakened, keeping him alert. Hours passed in quiet tension. Once, just before dawn, Aponi startled awake and reached for the child in panic, though he was still in her arms. Daniel reassured softly, and she settled again, embarrassed but too tired to speak. The night felt long, yet different from other nights in the empty house. For the first time in years, he was not alone with silence. Responsibility filled the space where loneliness had lived. Outside, the storm slowly weakened. A pale hint of morning approached the horizon, though clouds still covered the sky. As dawn began to break, the child's breathing remained fragile but steady enough to continue. Aponi opened her eyes and looked at Daniel across the room. Gratitude showed clearly, though words were few. Neither knew what the day would bring, but both understood one truth. Their paths had crossed for a reason, and the night had changed something inside the quiet ranch that could not return to how it was before. Morning arrived slowly, hidden behind heavy gray clouds. The storm had weakened, but the air remained cold and still. Thin snow covered the ground around the ranch, turning the desert pale and unfamiliar. Smoke rose steadily from the chimney, the only sign of life for miles. Inside the house, the fire had burned through most of the night. Daniel added another log before the flames could fade. He moved quietly, careful not to startle Aponi, who had only just fallen into deeper sleep near dawn. The baby still rested in her arms, wrapped tightly in the worn cloth. The child's breathing sounded softer now, but not fully safe. Every few moments Daniel found himself pausing his work just to listen. He did not trust the silence yet. He stepped outside briefly to check the animals. The cold bit at his face, but the sky showed signs the storm would pass by midday. Ranger greeted him with a low sound, calmer than the evening before. The cattle huddled together, waiting for feed. As Daniel worked, he noticed how different the ranch felt that morning. The same land, the same chores, yet his thoughts stayed inside the house instead of wandering empty paths. When he returned, a pony was awake. She looked frightened at first, as though unsure where she was, then remembered. Her eyes moved immediately to the child. She touched his forehead gently. "Still warm," she said. Daniel nodded. "But less." Relief softened her expression, though worry remained. He placed a small bowl of warm broth on the table. The smell filled the room. She hesitated, then accepted it. This time she ate slowly, strength returning little by little. Between small bites she watched the baby constantly, never letting her guard fall. After she finished, the child stirred and made a weak sound. A pony adjusted the cloth, but Daniel noticed the baby's breathing tighten again. A faint flush returned to the boy's cheeks, not healthy warmth, but fever rising once more. A pony's calm faded. "He is worse." Daniel did not answer immediately. Instead, he opened a wooden cabinet mounted high on the wall. Inside were only simple supplies, cups, dried food, and a few wrapped bundles he had not touched in years. He stared at them for a long moment. At the back sat a small wooden box, worn smooth at the edges. He hesitated before taking it down. Dust had gathered on its lid. He wiped it slowly with his sleeve. The box felt heavier than its size suggested, not from weight but from memory. For 2 years he had avoided opening it, as if doing so might pull him backward into grief. He had finally learned to walk around. Behind him, a pony watched silently. Daniel placed the box on the table and lifted the lid. Inside lay small cloth pouches, dried herbs tied with string, and folded papers covered with careful handwriting. The faint scent of plants rose from it, familiar and distant at once. His wife had kept these. She had helped neighbors during sickness seasons, learning remedies from travelers and local healers alike. Daniel had assisted her many times, though he never believed he remembered enough to use them alone. Now he tried. He searched carefully until he found the herb he hoped was right. His memory guided him more than certainty. He heated water and added a small amount, letting it steep while the steam filled the room with a bitter smell. A pony held the child closer, watching each movement. She did not interrupt. Trust, fragile but present, held her still. Daniel cooled the mixture, then dipped a cloth and gently pressed it to the child's skin as he once had long ago. They waited. Minutes stretched slowly. The baby fussed weakly, then settled. Daniel repeated the process again and again, careful not to overdo it. A pony whispered softly to the boy, her voice steady but tense. Hours passed. The clouds outside began to thin, letting pale daylight enter through the window. The room warmed enough that frost melted from the glass edges. Gradually, the child's breathing eased. The tightness softened. His small hands moved with a little more strength. When his eyes opened briefly, unfocused but alive, a pony's shoulders dropped in relief she could not hide. She lowered her head, eyes closed, whispering words Daniel did not understand but felt the meaning of. "You helped him," she said quietly after a long time. Daniel shook his head slightly. "We wait still." But hope had entered the room. Exhaustion soon claimed a pony. With permission in his nod, she lay on the nearby bed while Daniel held watch from the chair. The baby slept beside her, calmer now. Silence settled, not empty silence, but peaceful. As Daniel tidied the table, he noticed the corner of the child's blanket loosened. Something small glinted in the light. He carefully lifted the cloth just enough to see. A small silver cross hung from a thin leather string, sewn into the inner fold so it would not be lost. Daniel froze. He recognized it immediately. Years ago, his wife had owned that cross, a simple piece, nothing valuable, yet she cherished it. She had once traded it to a family she helped during childbirth near a traveling camp. She said the mother wanted something to remember kindness by. Daniel had not seen the cross since that day. His hands trembled slightly as he stared at it now resting beside the child's shoulder. He looked toward a pony, still asleep, then back to the boy. The past he had tried to leave behind seemed suddenly close, almost present in the quiet room. When a pony awoke later, Daniel asked gently where she received the blanket. She listened carefully before answering. She explained the child's mother had died giving birth months earlier. A traveling woman, kind, patient, had helped bring the baby safely into the world. Before leaving, that woman gave the cross to the family. Daniel said nothing for a long moment. He simply nodded and looked at the child again, understanding forming without more words. The room felt different after that, not just shelter shared by strangers, but a connection neither had expected when the knock first came the night before the afternoon light stretched across the floor as the clouds slowly cleared. Snow remained on the ground, but the sky had turned pale blue, and the air no longer felt as heavy as the night before. Inside the house, the quiet carried a different feeling now, not tense, not uncertain, but thoughtful. Apache sat near the window, holding the baby while he slept peacefully against her shoulder. His breathing was steady for the first time since she had arrived. Every few moments she checked his forehead, still careful, still protective, yet no longer afraid to blink or rest. Daniel stood near the table, the small wooden box still open beside him. He had not put it away. His fingers traced the edge of the lid, lost in thought. The silver cross rested in his palm, where he had carefully removed it from the blanket earlier to examine it closely before sewing it back exactly as he found it. He had spent years trying not to remember certain days, but memory had its own ways of returning. He remembered the day his wife had left the ranch to help travelers camped near the trading trail. She had said someone needed assistance, and she would not be gone long. She returned late that evening, tired yet peaceful, telling him a child had been safely born. She spoke about the family warmly and said kindness always travels farther than fear. Daniel had not understood then how far those words would reach. Now the proof of that day slept in the same room. He placed the cross gently back into the blanket, tying the thread carefully so it would not fall again. When he looked up, Apache was watching him. "You know it," she said softly. He nodded once. "My wife had it." Apache's eyes widened slightly. She looked down at the child, then back at Daniel, understanding forming slowly. "She saved his life," Daniel continued quietly. "Months before she passed." The room grew still. The wind outside had nearly faded, leaving only distant sounds of the land settling after the storm. Apache lowered her gaze respectfully. "Then he carries her kindness." Daniel did not answer right away. He stepped toward the window and looked across the ranch, the fence lines, the quiet hills, the open sky returning to normal. Yet nothing felt exactly the same. Late in the afternoon, faint movement appeared far across the distant trail. At first, Daniel thought it was only heat shifting above the ground, but the cold made that unlikely. He narrowed his eyes. Riders, still too far to see clearly, but traveling in formation, not wanderers, not traders. Apache noticed his attention change. "What is it?" He watched a moment longer before answering. "Travelers, maybe patrol." Her posture stiffened immediately. The calm she had gained vanished. She rose slowly, holding the child closer. "They look for people like me," she said quietly. Daniel understood. The territory had been tense for years. Groups were often forced to move, sometimes guided away, sometimes not given choice. Fear on both sides kept distance alive. "They far yet," he replied, still watching. "But they follow trail." Apache began wrapping the blanket more tightly around the baby. Her movements were quick but controlled, not panic, but decision. "I leave before dark," she said. "You helped enough. Trouble should not come to your home." Daniel turned from the window. The words settled heavily in the room. Only a day ago her presence had been unexpected. Now the thought of the house returning to silence felt different. "You and child not ready travel," he said. "Cold still strong." She shook her head gently. "Better cold than danger for you." He knew she meant it sincerely. She did not want repayment, only to protect the one who offered shelter. Yet the idea of sending them back into open land, especially after learning the connection, felt wrong in a way he could not easily explain. The riders in the distance moved slowly, not yet near but certain to pass within sight before night. Daniel added wood to the stove, though the fire did not need it. His mind worked through choices he had avoided for years, choices involving people, risk, and care. Apache finished tying the blanket and prepared to step toward the door. Before she reached it, Daniel spoke. "My wife believed helping someone never mistake," he said quietly. "She said fear grows when kindness stops." Apache paused but did not turn yet. He continued, voice steady though low. "If she helped his mother, then this house already part of his story." She slowly faced him again. "Winter not finished," he said. "You stay until safe." Her eyes searched his expression carefully, looking for doubt. She found none. "You know risk?" she asked. "Yes," silence followed. The child stirred softly between them, unaware of the decision forming around him. Outside, the riders moved along the far trail, their shapes clearer but still distant. They would pass near enough to see the ranch, but not close enough to inspect unless given reason. A pony lowered her head slightly, a gesture of deep respect rather than simple thanks. "Then I stay and work," she said, "not burden." Daniel almost smiled, the first hint of it in years. "Work always here," he replied. Evening approached gently. The sky turned gold over the snow-covered ground. They kept movement inside normal, smoke steady, animals fed, nothing to draw attention. When the riders finally passed along the distant ridge, they did not stop. Within minutes they became small shapes again and disappeared beyond the hills. Only after they vanished did a pony release the breath she had held. The house felt warmer than before, not because of the fire, but because a decision had been made. The ranch was no longer just a place of memory. It had become shelter once again, just as it had been long ago. And for the first time since Loss had emptied it, Daniel left the second bedroom door slightly open that night. Winter did not leave quickly that year. Cold mornings continued, and thin snow returned more than once before the land slowly began to soften. But the ranch no longer felt frozen in time the way it once had. The days found a new rhythm. Daniel still woke before sunrise, yet he no longer stepped outside alone. A pony would already be awake, quietly preparing warm water near the stove while the baby slept in a basket lined with folded cloth beside the fire. The small sounds of another person moving inside the house changed the silence. It was no longer heavy. It was lived in. At first they spoke very little, not from discomfort but from habit. Both were people used to quiet, yet work slowly brought conversation. Daniel showed her where feed was stored, how to check the fence lines, and how to calm Ranger when he grew stubborn. A pony learned quickly. She moved carefully around the animals, patient and observant. The horses accepted her presence sooner than Daniel expected. Animals often sensed calm before people did. In return, she repaired small things in the house, stitching worn cloth, cleaning tools, organizing shelves that Daniel had left untouched for years. She never moved anything belonging to his past without asking. That respect mattered more to him than he said aloud. The baby grew stronger with each passing week. His fever never returned after that long night. His eyes opened more often, dark and curious, following light through the window. When he first smiled, a brief, uncertain expression both adults noticed at the same moment. A pony laughed softly in surprise. Daniel stood still, unsure how to react to the sound that filled the room. It had been a long time since laughter lived there. The child soon learned the warmth of sunlight near the doorway in the afternoons. Daniel would pause his work longer than necessary just to watch him stretch small hands toward drifting dust in the light. Snow eventually melted into damp soil. The scent of earth returned. Grass pushed through slowly, and cattle wandered farther from the barn again. Spring approached. One morning Daniel realized he had not thought about the empty chair in weeks. It still stood in its place, yet it no longer felt like a reminder of absence. It had simply become part of the room, like the table or the window. Life around it had grown. Neighbors passing along distant trails began noticing movement at the ranch, 2 figures working instead of one, smoke rising more often, and sometimes the faint sound of a child carried by the wind. Some were curious, but few asked questions directly. Frontier life taught people to mind what was theirs and respect what was not. Occasionally, Daniel rode into town for supplies again. The first time he returned after winter, the shopkeeper studied him carefully, then simply nodded. No questions. Just quiet understanding that things had changed. Back home, a pony planted small seeds near the house where sunlight lasted longest. She explained they would grow into herbs useful for cooking and healing. Daniel listened and helped prepare the soil, though he knew little about planting beyond feed crops. The act itself felt meaningful, preparing for time beyond survival. The child began to crawl across the floor by late spring. His laughter became stronger, filling corners of the house that had once known only echoes. He followed Ranger along the fence while Daniel carried him, gripping the old horse's mane with delight. One evening, as the sun lowered across the hills, a pony spoke while watching the child play in the dirt. "He needs a name used by all," she said gently, "so both worlds call him." Daniel thought for a long moment. Names carried weight, memories, and hope. Finally, he suggested one simple name that existed in both their languages, easy to speak, easy to remember. She agreed with a quiet smile. From that day forward, the boy responded whenever either called. Seasons continued moving. Summer warmth replaced the cold wind. The ranch thrived better than it had in years, fences repaired, animals healthy, water barrels always full. More than once Daniel realized tasks felt lighter when shared. One evening he found the lantern hanging beside the door, polished and filled with oil though he had not done it. A pony noticed his gaze. "A light guides travelers," she said. He understood. The night she arrived had been guided by a faint hope someone would open a door. Now the ranch would offer the same chance to others if ever needed. He lit it that evening at sunset. Years later, riders crossing the territory would speak of a ranch marked by a steady lantern even in calm weather. They would tell of an aging rancher, a quiet woman, and a young boy who ran across the yard laughing while an old horse followed patiently behind. No one asked many questions. The land held many stories, and not all required explaining. Daniel sometimes sat on the porch at dusk watching the boy chase grasshoppers across the field. The past still existed in memory, but it no longer trapped him there. The house carried both loss and new life together, balanced in a way he once believed impossible. Every winter when cold returned, he hung the lantern earlier than necessary and kept it burning through the longest nights. Not as a signal of sorrow, but as a promise. Because once, on a freezing Christmas Eve, a quiet knock had changed everything. And he would never again let darkness answer such a knock alone.